Welcome to Origin Stories Fantastical Fridays. We have Sherwood Smith here today to talk about her book, Sasharia on Garde. So, give us a little bit of background about yourself as a writer.
I started writing as a little kid. I started making stories on paper towels in comic book form when I was 6 and 7 years old. So it's been a pretty much of a lifetime pursuit, running alongside regular real life. I would say I always wanted to write fantasy, but I would say besides the fantasy, I like reading, which has influenced me. The parts of my real life that have also influenced me have been reading history and traveling to Europe and working in the film industry.
Mm. What did you do in the film industry?
Well, this was in the late 70s, and it was very hard for women to do much of anything except be secretaries. So I actually did a lot of surprising things that I never got credit for, and finally got out of that business and started turning to books where one had a better chance of having one's name on your material, although I freelanced as a writer's secretary and researcher for some years after I actually left Hollywood. I worked for some screenwriters and ended up on some interesting projects, like the film itself stinks, Rambo 3. But the first screenplay was written by a guy named Harry Kleiner, who I'd worked for. And his idea was to put together a screenplay which would have very little dialogue from Sylvester Stallone because he's such a bad actor.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me to do the research for the setting, which was going to be Afghanistan. At that time, was not in the news. The Taliban was the new thing. So I thought, well, where am I going to learn about this? Because it's not in the news at all. So I talked to a friend of mine, Jim McDonald, who was at that time a Navy lieutenant stationed in Panama with his wife. They're good friends of mine. They're writers. They wrote terrific space opera, the Mage World series. Anyway, because I was being paid, I could actually call Panama.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is right around the time of Noriega, and his government was about to topple. So we're having these phone calls about weaponry, strategy, and tactics of that period. And then we'd switch off and we'd talk about our writing. Now, we already knew what each other was writing, so we kind of switch automatically to space battles, right?
Right.
So I'd say about and meanwhile, Noriega's government is toppling. I think about 4 or 5 conversations, and by the way, these were like $700 phone calls in those days. About 5 or 6 in, I'm noticing a lot of clicking. And I once asked Jim, are you hearing this clicking on the other end? And he says, yeah, I'm hearing clicking too. And then he wrote a letter. And of course, I got the letter a week later. It said, there's a pretty good chance that all of our phone conversations are being tapped. So I'm thinking back, I'm thinking, what are they hearing? They're hearing talk about warfare in Afghanistan and the Taliban and how to fight them and the weaponry that people would use and so forth. They're also hearing about space battles. Without the context of us writing science fiction. So I wonder if there's a file somewhere in some government on my covert ops. Anyway, that was one of the most fun parts of working in the film industry. Oh, the second claim to fame is that I was one of the 3 people who knew who shot JR. I used to read everything that came through. At that time, I was managing the Xerox department.
Mm.
It was not a glorified job. Women had a tough time doing anything. But there were a couple of producers who used to come down because they knew I read everything and I talked about it, who would pick my brain and then go back upstairs, their secretaries warned me, and use my ideas as theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I'll do that for a while because maybe they'll hire me. They never did. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm a super fast reader. And so even though I didn't watch most of these shows, in fact, during the 70s, I didn't have a television. I didn't want to watch any of this stuff. I thought 70s television was terrible, though I read it all because I wanted to see what people were interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So the screenwriter comes in with the last episode of Dallas. I think it was Dallas was the name of that show. And so he says, well, I have to stand here while you copy this because it's super secret. And I said, Roger that. So I hand copied it. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Timer. I hand copied it. He did not know that I was reading it because I can read 1,000 words a minute, and there's less than that on a page of the screen.
Right.
So I'm reading it, and give it back to him, and he goes away. And I mentioned casually to one of my coworkers who came in, well, that was really predictable about who shot JR. And that was all I said. A half an hour later, I get a call from the head of Lorimar, the top dog. He says, so you read the screenplay? Nobody has read the screenplay. My wife has not read the screenplay. There are 3 people who know what is in that screenplay. And if I hear anything about you winning bets in Las Vegas, I will know who to come to. And I was like, I have to realize in those days, there was gossip that Lorimar was connected with the mafia. I don't know if it's true. I don't care. They're all gone. But I never told anybody who shot JR. But after the episode came out, it was like, whew. And of course the world went, oh, that was predictable. So anyway, that's my second story.
So what sparked the idea for Sasharia and Garde in particular?
Well, it's actually 2 ideas. I started writing Son's story back around the time that I was writing Crown Jewel. I was in my early 20s. I was living in Europe. And it occurred to my ideas come to me because I'm a visual writer as scenes. I see everybody and see the scene, and I start writing it, and then I watch the movie in my brain and write it. Okay. So even though I was sitting in Europe, what I was seeing was a Renaissance fair, only in a European setting. And the female is, having her fun, typical American hippie, because this is the early 70s, and I was a hippie, long hair. But the guy is a real prince. He's just not in a costume. Well, I just thought that was the hottest idea ever. And I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing. And then I realized when I looked ahead at the story, I realized that when they jumped over to the other world, this was going to be really depressing because they were going to a revolution. I thought, forget this. I'm not writing it. I hate not happy endings. There's enough of that in real life. So I set it aside. And, every few years I would take it out, look at it, think, shall I toss it? No, I still like it. Well, 20 years later, her daughter's story hit me like that. And I thought, aha, now I've got the full thing and it has a happy ending. So, of course, I wrote it.
That's awesome. It's funny how sometimes you just have to wait and you have to be able to be patient enough. And then you figure it out later.
Yes.
But it's hard to be patient when you just want it to be done.
Yeah, or you want it to change. In that particular situation, I did not want Son to have an unhappy ending.
Right.
And I saw an unhappy ending. I had to wait until I saw what happened years afterwards. And then it was worth writing.
Yeah. So so how long did it took you 20 years to feel comfortable with the plot of the story, but how long did it take you to be comfortable with the world? Because I know you've been writing in that world for a very long time.
Oh yeah, since I was 8.
So how much exploration of the world did you do before you started publishing stories from that world?
Um, I've always been working on it. I didn't publish anything in that world until Crown Jewel came out, and that was an experiment. And when it first came out, I changed it to another world. I wrote a children's series called Red to the Rescue, and that one, it's based on this world, but it's a light version. It doesn't have the things that I knew publishers in those days wouldn't publish.
Mm-hmm.
So because Crown Jewel stood alone and it wasn't interconnected with all of the other stories, I thought, well, let's try this one and see if anybody likes it. So I changed it a little bit and set it in the other world, and it turned out to be successful. So when it came time for the paperback, I put it back where it belonged and changed all the names back. So that was connected with this one because Kennard and Marinder is connected with the bad guys in the Crown Jewel world.
Mm-hmm.
And, I knew all of the politics.
Yeah. I'm so excited. This is like one of the only books of yours that I haven't read yet. So I'm Sasharia.
Oh, I didn't know you hadn't read it. Oh,
I haven't yet. No. It's okay. You can spoil things. I've read almost everything else. So I'm really excited to see it and see how all the pieces fit together. So I guess you sort of answered this a little bit, but I'm going to ask it in case the answer is different. What was the most challenging part of writing Sasharia?
It pretty much wrote itself once the plot came in. I should add that the rest of the plot came in after I'd been writing these other ones and time had progressed, but also after I became a mom.
Mm.
I don't think that I could have written about son's daughter in my 20s because I just didn't think that way. When you're in your 20s, you're an adult and you're independent for your family and you're living your life. And so that's what Sun was doing. She got away from her clingy, super conservative mom who was trying to force her into the mold of the early 60s. And she was a typical hippie, escaping that. But when I came back to it, I'm looking at the story from the point of view of the daughter, even though I was a mother. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think the thing that would make sense is that now I could see both points of view, mother's point of view and daughter's point of view.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized I had to have both of them in there, both of their points of view, that the mother's was as important as Sasha's.
Yeah. That makes sense. So why do you come back to this world over and over and over again? What is it about it that keeps you there?
It's been, hang on, can you do a stop? My daughter just walked in. I'm doing a video interview.
Oh, okay, I'll be quiet.
Okay, do you want to take them actually? Because they bark once in a while.
Naughty. Okay.
Well, they're not being bad, but they do bark.
Yeah. Okay. Where should I take them though?
Well, how about putting Puppy in here because they'll be quiet.
Yeah.
Oh, except if FedEx comes by.
Yeah. I mean, we can just go downstairs for a bit.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
We have to keep some of the dogs separate because there are two who fight.
Mm.
They used to be good buddies and then they just started ripping into each other. So we have to go through all this separation stuff when my daughter's up here visiting, which she currently is. She arrived last night. Anyway, all right, so back to the world. It was my escape as a child. I did not feel that my home was safe at times, which it wasn't. But this was the 50s when certain kinds of child abuse were more or less overlooked.
Yeah.
Different attitudes toward raising kids. For instance, if you got in trouble at school, you would get in trouble again at home for having gotten in trouble at school.
Right.
And it was my escape. As I got older, I got involved with the characters and the people, and I kept wanting to know what else happens to them, what else. And I kept thinking, oh yeah, I'll grow up, because everybody said, this is stupid. You'll grow out of it, blah, blah, blah. So I kept expecting that to happen, and it never did.
I had an English teacher once who said that the best stories were the ones that you could come back to over and over and over again and get something new out of it every single time.
Yes.
And that was his justification for why boring old books like Shakespeare, not that Shakespeare's boring, but we're still taught, is that you can still learn a lot from them. And I think, well, I know for sure that Crown Jewel is one of those books for me. So I completely understand.
Yeah, Jane Austen is for me.
Jane Austen is awesome too. Yeah. Yeah. So what should we be most excited about when we start reading?
When we start what?
When we start reading Sasharia.
That's a hard question. I think that would depend on the reader. Everybody's reading experience is so different. An older person might be more interested in Sun. A younger person might be more interested in Sasha. It was first published by a publishing company, people I really liked. They were awesome people, but they're a romance publisher. And I think the readership was disappointed because there wasn't any sex in it. And there was all this other fantasy stuff and all this other action, when usually a romance is focusing on hero and heroine and everybody else is kind of at the sides.
Right.
So it wasn't the right place for that book. That's why I was glad when I got the rights back and I could put different covers on and put it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm very excited to read it, and I hope everyone else is too, and we will have you again for Aurelia's virtual book club. So
excellent. Oh, I look forward to that.